This is Duke University.
Global trade and environmental justice.
Human rights issues are still.
The term Ubuntu.
About the Alien and Sedition Acts.
Is making inferential discovery.
The importance of an archive.
The John Hope Franklin Center. We're here in front of the Nasher Museum of Art in Durham, North Carolina, where there's a wonderful new exhibition called The Record, curated by Trevor Schoonmaker. We're going to do something a little different this week on Left to Black and take us out of our studios in John Hope Franklin Center and walk into the Nasher Museum to look at the record. I'm Anthony Neal, and this is Left to Black. Good afternoon. You're watching Left to Black. I'm Anthony Neal, and we're here with Trevor Schoonmaker, the contemporary art curator here at the Nasher Museum in Durham, North Carolina. How are you doing today, Trevor?
Doing great. And yourself?
I'm doing fine, and we're glad to have you on the show. We're going to do a little special thing today. We're talking to you now in your offices here at the Nasher, but we're also going to do a bit of a walkthrough of your new exhibit,
Sure.
The Record.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the record and your motivations and what you were trying to do with this particular exhibit.
Well, the record is a look at 41 different artists from around the world who have engaged with vinyl in some capacity over the last 45 years. And it's really, the exhibition is set up sort of like an exploration of the subject. And it's as international as possible, it's as diverse as possible, in order to give us sort of a more balanced look at records in contemporary art. So it's not album covers per se. It's not even necessarily looking at sound art recorded on vinyl, but it's really how vinyl's been manipulated by artists.
I know one of the exhibits that you have downstairs that's really striking is the work of Satch Hoyt, you know, who's done this huge piece with these red records. And in some ways, that's one of the more traditional pieces in the exhibit, the kind of thing you would kind of expect, you know, when you hear about an exhibit,
Right.
you know, dealing with records and vinyl. But what are some of the other pieces that are in the exhibit that kind of challenge our thinking around
Yeah, well, you're right that Satch's piece comes across, it feels traditional in that it's sculptural. It looks like a canoe.
Right.
It looks like, okay, someone turned records into a form that we're familiar with. But other artists like Christian Marclay have taken it and actually cut up records, and just as a DJ cuts and mixes, he actually cut the records himself, so he created these Frankensteinian records.
Yeah.
Or Carrie Mae Weems is using a record as a metaphor to talk about sort of cultivation of identity, or how you project your own identity. So it's used in all different ways and capacities, and in many ways as a metaphor.
Many folks who know of your work before you got here to Nasher will remember the great exhibit that you did on Fela Kuti almost a decade ago in New York City.
Oh, wow.
You know, which begs the question, you know, given your success in the art world in some place like New York, what was the appeal of coming down to North Carolina and coming here to Duke and coming to the Nasher?
Well, it's on multiple levels, but the main appeal is that I'm a North Carolinian. I'm originally from Winston-Salem, North Carolina. It was a chance to come back home, and there being a museum that's really dedicated to contemporary art. Really, it's not the only thing we do, but we're really trying to push the envelope in contemporary art, and it was a rare opportunity for me. I've been a freelancer, independent curator in New York for 8 years, and this is a new opportunity. It's great. It's a brand new museum when I got here. It's an opportunity to sort of help build a museum from the ground up.
Your first exhibition here, street level, going back a few years ago, work with William Cordova, Mark Bradford. What were you trying to achieve with that particular project?
Well, that was a show. It was my first opportunity here, and I didn't want to get in over my head before I knew what I was doing. And so it really was a chance to look at 3 artists who I was really excited about, and you know, Mark, William, and also Robin Rode.
Robin Rode, right? He's from South Africa.
He's from South Africa, and Mark being from Los Angeles, and William being sort of this nomadic artist originally from Peru and Miami. But it was really an investigation of these 3 artists and their engagement with street culture, and sort of taking the vibe of the street and infusing it into contemporary art, but not in the stereotypical way you imagine. The 3 artists really hadn't been talked about in conversation before.
A lot of your work really kind of captures and really, I think, challenges our assumptions about the vernacular. and it was particularly on display with your second exhibition here, the Barclay Hendricks. And of course, you know, Hendricks was also part of the earlier work that you did with Fela, his own portrait of Fela Kuti. Talk a little bit about, you know, doing the Barclay Hendricks project, particularly in the context of an artist who really, in some ways, hasn't gotten his just desserts, if you will. Yeah. You know, in terms of his impact on younger, particularly African-American artists and other folks. Talk a little bit about Barclay Hendricks.
Well, I mean, you said it. Barclay had not gotten the recognition that he deserved, and so it was a great opportunity for me to be able to step in, and also with Rick Powell being here at Duke and being one of the foremost scholars, art historian here at Duke University, and one of the foremost scholars in the field, and one of the few people who's really written about Barclay prior to that exhibition. So it's a great opportunity for us, and Barclay is a huge influence on artists, but not known by the broader public, or even many people, experts in the art world. So he's influenced Kehinde Wiley and Jeff Sondhaus and Mick Elaine Thomas, and it's a long list. And now looking back after the exhibition and having traveled around, and he's won all sorts of awards, which he justly deserves, and he's being his work is being acquired into major museum collections like the Tate Modern, and I mean major museums, and it's where he should have always been. But there are all these, you know, as you know, these social obstacles, art world obstacles, and
talk a little bit about those. You know, I think, you know, we've talked about this before. You know, on a one-on-one level. I mean, one of the things that's so refreshing about your work is that you don't seem to be concerned about the general boundaries, particularly around representation, race and gender, that we generally think about in terms of highbrow art. You know, the 3 exhibitions that you've done thus far, you know, Street Level, The Record, and Barclay Hendricks, I mean, are very refreshing in that regard. I mean, that there is always a kind of clear presence of an African-American artistic sensibility, of an African, broader Black diaspora sense of art sensibility in the stuff that you've done. You know, what would you say is your motivation, you know, for really bringing such a broader view of what art can be?
Well, on the most personal level, on the selfish perspective, I'm interested in doing what no one else is interested in doing. And that's what actually motivates me, first and foremost. But with any exhibition that I organize, I really think about the public a lot. And for me, the broader mission is to get more people engaged with contemporary art, because a lot of people feel like they don't really care about contemporary art, but mainly because there's very little exposure and very little education to understand
and also perhaps that some of these spaces are not hospitable to the present. I mean, I know that's the case for younger African Americans.
Yeah, so it's trying to do what people aren't doing, trying to give some attention to things that have been overlooked, artists who haven't yet had opportunities. I mean, those are the things that excite me, and to be involved in a dialogue where I feel like I'm more of a facilitator, like you guys are the intellectual experts, and I can facilitate it and put it out there, and then you can sort of massage it and work with it.
I'm Mark Anthony Neal. You're watching Left of Black. We're here with Trevor Schoonmaker, the modern art, contemporary art, is that contemporary art curator here at the Nasher Museum in Durham, North Carolina. I know you're in the middle of an exhibition now, so you know perhaps it's bad form to ask. What's next? You know, on your plate.
Well, the most immediate thing is in the spring and March we open up a show of the first collection show of what we've acquired over the last 5 years, and it's all contemporary art. So it's sort of a look at our vision in collecting in the first 5 years the museum's been newly opened. And that's exciting to me because it actually is very reflective of our exhibition program. And so you're going to see a lot of artists of African descent. You're going to see a lot of artists who have had their first work acquired into a museum. And then also going back and acquiring those who should have been in museums all along, from Alma Thomas to Barclay Hendricks and so forth. And then looking down the road, I still got some things in formation, but it'll follow sort of the path that we've set up thus far. People who have not received enough attention, or the timing hasn't been right for them, other obstacles in the way. Definitely still engaging in the arts of the African diaspora, and definitely still engaging things on a popular level, but with a critical look.
You're watching Left of Black. I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here with Trevor Schoonmaker, and now we're going to segue and go take a look at the new exhibit here at the Nasher, The Record. So this is the work here of Malik Sidibe. For photographs, and they have a very classical feel to them. You know, 1960s this moment of European independence. Talk a little bit about, you know, what he's doing in these photographs.
Yeah, it's a moment of African independence from European colony, in this case, France. And it's also the moment, of course, the beginnings of the Black Power movement in the U.S. in the 60s. And so all these things are sort of coming together. What Sidibe was documenting were these young social groups in Bamako, Mali. And what you see are kids who he's photographed in those social clubs, whether they're a teenager, early 20-something. You see the two women here with the James Brown record. And what I'm trying to portray is how important records were at that particular moment, how they conveyed, you know, I'm connected to the greater world.
And African-American soul, American soul music.
Completely. I mean, James Brown.
Yeah. I mean, we see the same narrative in terms of Jamaican artists, Rastafarians listening to R&B music in the States, and so you get you know, a more international feel for that particular dynamic.
And it's also, you know, using the record, like posing with the 45. Well, this kid probably didn't own this 45, but for him to pose it with it is saying, you know, I have this connection. I'm basically positioning my identity and focusing it through this lens of the record.
And the portability of it, right?
The portability, absolutely.
Right, you know, a moment where folks still have portable record players, right, that they traveled around with, took to parties with them, and things of that nature. Over here we have the work of Minger and Mike, and of course he may be one of the most famous artists in the exhibition outside of the art world.
Exactly. Yeah, it's interesting because outside of the art world he is a cult hero in the record collecting world. In the art world he's totally unknown. I can't tell you like the curators and artists who walk through and just have no idea who he is. And that's what's beautiful about it, to bring him into this conversation with Malik Sidibe, with William Cordova and others. But he's, you know, at the same time that Sidibe was documenting these kids in these social clubs in Bamako, in West Africa, in Washington, D.C., Minger Mike was doing his thing where he created this fictional universe where he was the soul superstar, he was the record exec, he was the album cover artist, and
he was a hip-hop mogul before, you know, there was such a thing.
Exactly.
I mean, I think what's fascinating about his work is that he clearly saw album art as a space to explore notions of African-American identity and freedom. And of course, he's responding obviously to things like the album cover of Miles Davis's Bitches Brew.
That's right.
As I mean, all the artists themselves are at this moment where there's a certain freedom that's articulated in the music, but also in the presentation.
That's right. And you can see, I mean, there's references you can pick up where he's, you know, live at the Howard Theater or Boogie Down at the White House, or there's particular works where he's positioned himself just like Marvin Gaye with his attire. He even has references to particular groups, but it's still all him. And he's really reflecting the social and political climate of the era in a really beautiful way.
How important was it for you to bring him into this mix?
Really, extremely important. I mean, I would say for me, he's oddly a cornerstone of the exhibition because it's something you noted earlier. It's really important for me to not just have the obvious in the exhibition.
But this makes sense, right? I mean, this makes such complete sense.
And the other thing it does is that it enables me to not have to put mass-produced records and covers anywhere in the exhibition. So, like these fanciful, fictive album covers speak volumes beyond any you know, cover that we actually are familiar with.
Now, has he talked at all much about what he was thinking about when he was doing this work?
You know, I've asked him a few questions, and he's fairly elusive. He hasn't really said a whole lot about it, but you know, it was his fantasy world, and it's like being maybe not satisfied with his own environs and his own opportunities and possibilities. He created this place where he was running the show, and he was the star. And it's only a few years ago that he actually was recognized at all. So it's really kind of a great success story. And when you mention him to other artists now who are familiar with him,
they have
they're like most appreciative that he's in the show, maybe more than anyone.
Wow,
which is great.
We're gonna walk over here to the work of Carrie Mae Weems, and you know, it's a fascinating piece on so many different levels. You know, here she takes this record, idea of a record, right? Picture of Dee Dee Bridgewater, live at the Copa, to articulate around the notion of an absence.
That's right.
Of herself and other black women in various art worlds, you know, really, if you think about it in that context.
Yeah, well, it's where, you know, she has a long history in her work of photographing herself and positioning herself as if she is some character we're familiar with.
This is not Dee Dee. This
exactly.
is
this
Carrie Mae
could,
Weems.
but it could be.
Right.
Exactly.
But
she's obviously importantly referencing Dee Dee's that we could be familiar with. Could be also Dee Dee.
Dee Dee Sharp.
Dee Dee Sharp. Exactly. Right. Thank you. So there are those references, but the fact that her album has gone gold, that's an ode to affirmative action, also addressing that layer of absence,
particularly in the art world.
Particularly in the art world, and little things like Clarksdale Records, references to Clarksdale, Mississippi, and Delta Blues and Muddy Waters, and it's really multi-layered, but she doesn't hit you over the head with it. And the other thing I love about this work in particular is that in the art world, it's also one of these ones that's virtually unknown.
Right.
People haven't ever seen it in person because it's been sitting in her studio since 1989 when she made it. And we were able to dig it out and actually acquire it for the museum. It's now in our collection.
Oh, that's nice. And she'll be coming to Durham soon. In a couple of months.
Yeah, she'll be here in early February, I believe.
Residence for a little while. We're going to go around the corner. And Xavier Simmons, and her work is very much all-encompassing. We're going to literally, walk into the space. Yes. And this seems to be an attempt to just capture many different locales, and talking about how she circulates there, but also how her art circulates in these different spaces.
What she did with this project was she's based in New York. She came down to North Carolina, and first she did her research, and she sort of looked at these sort of cultural, historical sites, and she traveled from, Kitty Hawk to the mountains and everywhere in between, and she sort of looked at the landscape and kind of intuitively thought, well, what sort of character would have been here? And she created these multi-layered sort of traveling musician type characters, and as if they came out of the ground. It's like she's excavated history, and this person has come out. So you're familiar with this in Monk's birthplace in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. This is actually downtown Durham. And she doesn't intentionally tell us the locations, but she wants us to just sort of respond.
Figure it out.
Exactly. But then what she did, and what we're listening to, the soundscape, is she sent them to musicians here in North Carolina, and then back in New York where she lives and works, and her peer group there is as much musicians as it is artists, and that's one of the things in the exhibition. So many of these artists are also dabbling in music or DJs, and so you've got Tunde Adebimpe from TV on the Radio, and you've got locally Mac McCon and Harrison Haynes. So, and they responded to each photograph by writing a song
about it.
Yeah.
And so she was here for a while and spun and had
we had a listening party outside, and I mean, she played everything, everything you could possibly imagine, from metal to funk to hip hop,
which in some ways, really is kind of a metaphor for the exhibition.
That's right. And we got to produce a record, which an LP, which we don't do in the museum world.
We're going to walk across here. The work of Fadima Toure, and this is a different kind of piece. On the one hand, it makes perfect sense, but it's moving, and that's not quite a record.
That's right.
What is she working at here?
This is a work called Fefe and Gramophone, and what it is you're looking at, this is called Fefe in northern Nigeria, where Fatima is originally from. Of course, she lives and works in Durham, North Carolina now. But it's at the same time that LPs and vinyl are being imported into West Africa. This sort of traditional woven raffia grass was very popular at the time. So because they're roughly the same size and thickness, the two took on the same popular name, and they were both just referred to as Fefe.
Okay.
And so in this case, we hear what she's recorded is this all-women's band in Nigeria singing about women's work and women's contribution to society. The percussion is only like pots and pans. And so, she's addressing, gender. I mean, it's a really complex piece, actually. This being like a hot plate essentially used by women in the kitchen.
So it's taking an aspect of the everyday lives of women in Nigeria and really talking about how it's not just work, right? I mean, it really is broader cultural expression.
Yeah. So and this is a case where the idea of the record is enabling her to speak about something
totally
far
beyond
the confines of vinyl.
Gonna walk over some more. This, of course, is David Byrne, and folks know a young David Byrne in the Talking Heads. And this is from one of their early albums?
Yeah, this is from an early album from 1978 called More Songs About Buildings and Food. And basically, this work is included because David Byrne started as a visual artist at the Rhode Island School of Design. And as many artists at the Rhode Island School of Design, including Harrison Haynes and Les Savy Fab, have become musicians and better known for their sonic art and their music than their visual art. Right. But he's always been an artist, and this is a case where this is what he produced for the album cover. Right. So it's a montage of 539 or 529, I can't remember the exact number, of Polaroid photographs. So it's basically a mosaic. You had to take each one independently and create this composite form of the band. So it's, I mean, in and of itself, it's a brilliant work of art, but it really speaks to album cover art without me having to have album covers again on the wall. It also reminds people, like the analog era, taking a Polaroid photograph, putting it together, creating some object. Different kind of moment.
Yeah, I mean, the literal cut and paste,
exactly.
right? Before you could do it digitally.
Exactly.
I mean, it reminds me his story, of course, of someone like Chuck D, who folks forget was a graphic artist in college, and so he's the one who designs the famous Public Enemy crosshair, and this interesting kind of mix, right, where literally artists who are making albums are already conscious about what they want to do artistically in terms of presentation of it.
And it's interesting you bring that up because there are two references to Public Enemy in the show. Two different artists have taken his design, essentially, his logo that he created, the branding for the band, and worked it into their work.
I want to go take a look at the work of William Cordova.
Okay. The sculptural work outside?
Yeah, let's take it. Okay. And then we can also look at Satch's work outside also. I do want to stop real quickly. You mentioned Thelonious Monk earlier.
Yeah.
And this particular piece here, which in some ways almost makes a direct reference to Simmons's work with the two tracks. And,
that's right.
And here we have the two turntable arms, the two needle arms.
Well, it's a work by Sean Duffy, and let's see if it's actually on. Yeah. So it's where he has created this composite turntable, which is, two turntables sort of put together, and you can play two parts of a track
at the same time.
At the very same time.
Which almost seems perfectly normal in the work of Thelonious Monk.
It sounds right with Thelonious. It's funny, if you were to put on like James Brown, it would sound crazy, but with Thelonious it sounds
there's a logic to it, right?
Exactly. So, he's someone who's been working with records for a long time, but also to be able to bring in jazz, to be able to bring in Thelonious. There's different ways of sort of curating to bring in these elements without having to have a work that is solely addressing that. It's also about his technical artistry.
Right. Now, William Cordova was someone that was in your street level exhibition.
That's right.
And there are a few artists that have appeared in the works that the shows that you've curated here before in this particular show.
Yeah.
But this is Cordova's piece here.
That's right. Yeah, there's certain artists who I will incorporate back into other exhibitions down the line, and I wouldn't keep doing a solo show or a major investigation of that same artist, but I guess when you're drawn to a certain artist, he or she is going to easily fit into a big thematic show with 41 artists too. And there's reasons why I'm drawn to William's work, and this is one of them. This column of records is almost 3,000 different records. Yes. And it basically speaks to the recording.
Probably close to 3,000 pounds.
Yeah. It weighs a ton. Thank God that's not my job to lift it. But he, as you're familiar with in the street level show, there's this sense of an informal shrine with the broken shards at the bottom. And basically it's like this totem to people who've been not properly recognized in the recording of history. So each record
where the records are stacked
stands for that record, and then this is sort of the shattering of that history. And he has all these clues that are in there about his own interests, his own passion, and also his own personal history. So the little, the VHS tape is got eyes on the prize on it, you know, the famous civil rights documentary. So all these things are evident, and Shango, the god of thunder and lightning of the Yoruba, and the Afro-Peruvian gourd from where he's originally from. He gives little clues, and he never really spells it out for us. But
the battery.
The battery, exactly.
Battery, right?
The Duracell battery, exactly. Charging things. The tire, you know, about his life and living this nomadic life of moving from one place to another, having the ability to get out of a place that's not good. And then it references people, you know, in his titles are really important, and so he always has these subtitles. So this is greatest hits, but one of the people in the subtitle is Tom Wilson, who was the great producer of many, many acts, including the Velvet Underground, but he didn't get the recognition he deserved because he's in the shadow of Andy Warhol. Right. So again, he's trying to, kind of like what we're trying to do at the Big Show, Williams doing it on his own level. On his own,
micro level.
Yeah.
You know, over here we have this huge vessel. The work of Satch Hoyt. And Satch is an interesting figure himself. A musician, visual artist, you know, sculptor, you know, a range of different things. And of course the color of this is very striking, but it also becomes this kind of metaphor for, you know, not only traveling with the music, but, you know, the music allowing you to travel.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and that's really what the work is about. And the origin of the work came out of an 18th century sort of slave narrative. A British surgeon had like written down this account of being in what is present day Nigeria and being in, you know, witnessing the canoes packed full of human cargo coming out to the slave ships. And that's sort of the origin, thinking about the beginning of what became the Middle Passage. But for him, it's much more metaphorical and something that's really positive too. You know, it's the mothership, it's everything. You know, it's a passage out of here on the most positive means. And you're right, music being that unifying element, bringing people together, allowing you a means of escape and transporting you.
And Satch is one of the artists that was here in residence.
That's right.
You know, he came here last fall to do this, and gave a lot of folks a chance to see him at work, you know, in the studio where he was composing, you know, essentially. How important has it been to make sure that the artists have some sort of contact with the public, particularly the non-traditional art world public?
It's really helpful for us. You can say as much as you want as a curator and as a representative of the museum, but when you have the artists in, it speaks in a completely different way to the public, and to have people have personal engagement with the artists, whether it's students at Duke or whether it's people in the community, or you know, we try to do both, and that really goes such a long way. It's such a unique opportunity, and people like Satch and Zyveria and others who we brought in, Dario Robledo, they love that engagement, and they're really good at imparting what they know to others in a way that's digestible.
One of the other features of the exhibit, and we could walk over here, cover to cover. Having various artists, you know, put together essentially their own milk crate. Of records that were important to them, and you know, we'll take some time now to highlight one of our buddies here, Ninth Wonder. This is, you know, his little crate area here.
That's right.
Ninth Wonder, who of course has provided the music for Left of Black, and a friend of the Nashers, as well as a friend of Left of Black. And in some ways, this becomes a really part of the exhibition, and folks will come in and literally be able to listen to the records. I was here with a group of young undergraduate students a couple of months ago, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't, you know, they'd never seen record players before. They were trying to figure out how to fast forward and all those kinds of things. You know, so
you do that like this.
You know, so it gets us back to a more traditional relationship with vinyl for a generation of folks, in which, you know, vinyl is some sort of amorphous concept to them. You know?
I think, you know, you basically covered the critical component of this, in that it's making the show accessible. If you don't have the understanding of the tactile quality of vinyl, the personal relationship people have with vinyl, you know, actually going here like you were doing, going through it, you know, pulling a record out, the sound, everything, you know, and just actually pulling the record out. So it's like that's really important, and it's such a
Bobby Womack, the poet. This is a great album. Good choice, Knight.
But you know, I asked all the artists and musicians here to actually select based on the album covers, so that they could tell some story. And it was also a way for me to talk about album cover art
Right.
without me talking about
Right,
it.
and not having to put it up on a
And
big
having
wall,
to put it on a
right.
pedestal and look like the curator's favorite albums, and which nobody really wants to see, and everybody wants to see some sort of reflection of themselves.
I remember talking to you about this exhibit when you first started on the conceptualization level.
Yeah.
And not quite getting it, right?
Yeah.
Because I think immediately everybody thinks, oh, album covers, yeah, that'd be cool, I
Yeah.
think. But,
Yeah.
But it really is something that's much more expansive than that, you know, and it's, you know.
Well, in fairness, I probably wasn't articulating it very well because I could you know, I'm a visual person. I first see things before I can actually speak about it.
Right.
And so for a long time, it was hard to like break it down into one
Right.
sentence. This is what it is. And now we're a little better at that, but still the complexity of the show you can't get
Right.
just from sort of telling someone, you know,
Yeah.
this is what the exhibition's about. But it, you know, it is really about that personal relationship. It's about that sense of discovery that people have with records. It's about that very personal moment of holding a record. You know, this is like first engagement with visual art, right here.
Right,
you know,
right.
before,
As a kid, right? You
before
know,
a museum,
going through your
Yeah.
parents' record collection.
and
Right.
staring for hours at this one
Yeah.
album cover, trying to understand that third track that you love so much. Like, what does that have to do
I
with
can
it?
still remember those Ohio Player albums.
That's right. Well, those are eye-grabbing.
I'm Mark Anthony Neal. We're here on Left of Black with Trevor Schoonmaker,
Thanks very
who
much.
is the contemporary art curator here at the Nasher Museum. We're here looking at the exhibit, The Record, which runs until February
6th.
February 6, 2011. So make sure if you're in Durham or around Durham to make sure and take a great look at the wonderful work that's going on here at the Nasher Museum, the great work that Trevor Schoonmaker is doing, and the record exhibit. Mark Anthony Neal, Left of Black. See you next week.
Produced by Duke University. Online at duke.edu.